So welcome everyone. Today is all about graduation guidelines. And for those who are joining us from outside of Colorado, we're hoping that we'll be able to kind of do that mental crosswalk of what we're doing here in the state of Colorado and how you might be able to leverage that within your own state. This session is recorded through Tableau. They'll post it within approximately 24 hours. Post close of this onto their YouTube channel, so we'll be able to share this content, and then if any of the presenters have collateral that they also want to share, we'll be able to send that out into a mass email. The chat feature is a way for us all to communicate side chats and make those network connections, and then the Q&A goes to the panelists here on the call, and we'll be able to answer specific questions based on that presentation. Those drop downs will allow you to send messages to everyone or to specific. So just be aware of when you submit that chat or QA in there. So I'm Stephanie Henry. I work at Plant Moran. I'm a manager in our management consulting practice. Within that firm, the management consulting team, I sit in the business analytics side of the house. So we support clients all over the country, take their data and make use of it for great use cases. And so our team handles and trains and mentors staff like yourself or your peers with best practices for data integration, ingestion, preparing it for BI tools such as Tableau. I support this user group for many years now. I see it as a way to help you all to make those network connections to really help guide your business. Sitting in your seat, it was invaluable to make those connections and talk to your peers, find out what they're doing, share ideas. So I'm really passionate about continuing to support this group. I'm going to hand it over to my partner in crime here.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Claire Sims. I am at the Boulder Valley School District, and my role is the Senior Data Visualization Designer for the district. So I work with district and building staff to build data visualizations for our educators, and very happy to be here with all of you this morning. So the first thing we're going to dive into this morning is a roundtable discussion. We'll be speaking a little bit for Boulder Valley. We also have representatives from Academy District 20 and from Cherry Creek School District as well. And so what we're going to be really talking about is graduation guidelines, and especially focusing on the data visualization and Tableau aspect of that, and doing internal reporting on that data for stakeholders within our districts. So just a very quick refresher about the Colorado graduation guidelines. This is a menu of options provided by the state for ways that students can demonstrate their readiness for graduation and for college and career readiness. The readiness indicators are in the areas of reading, writing, and communicating, and then also in math. And as you can see here, there are a variety of options, including various assessments, industry certificates, performance assessments, and capstone projects as well. Local school boards choose from this menu of option provided by the state to provide their own options to students. This is going live for the class of 2022, so I think it's top of mind for a lot of us. And really the purpose is providing clarity about that meaning of post-secondary and workforce readiness, which is something that we talk about a lot in the school district world in Colorado.
So I'm hoping you all can hear me better now. There was some comments that my mic was not working properly, so I apologize for that one. All right, so we are going to use the concept of the reporting life cycle to frame our discussions with the panelists. And so I'm going to just spend a few moments talking about the reporting life cycle. I live and breathe by this, and when I work with my clients, I really try to instill the value that this concept has. And so we start at the very top. It's that approve request. So you have a data request that comes in, and you have to have it vetted and have to have it prioritized by your boss to know, I'm getting handed 10 things, which one matters, and are you going to back me up with support on this one? So you have the request approved, and so today we're talking about graduation guidelines. Requirement gathering, and so you're trying to get all of the information you need to be successful up front. So requirements such as what are the non-negotiables? Do you have MVP tests in there? When you go even down to the beyond the state reporting aspect of it, what does your team need in order to be successful? Asking really deep, thoughtful questions about how do they need to interact with the data? What is the output? What types of screens are they going to be using? Filters and parameters. What is the date frame around these pieces? What kind of demographics do they need to, slice and dice by all of these things? There's a whole laundry list. And so if you get those up front, it's going to cause less iteration down the line. So once you have all of your requirements gathered, it's important to have those design sessions with key players. So rather than just sit in your office by yourself crafting these great things, coming and then presenting them and saying this is not user friendly to me, and you're having to start over. So if you can involve the right people up front first, it's going to be very invaluable to the process. So once the team, a small set of team comes together and talks about the design, you got to make sure that you can make that design come to life. And so you talk about data modeling. What fields do you need to be able to produce that final output, and thinking those details through. And then finding out how you're going to go get that data. And if there is a gap in that data, how are you going to get that into the system? And then you're going to develop it throughout your team, testing it, making sure it's working as expected. You're proofing the values. You might have to go back and do some small edits, whether it's in your dashboard or maybe your data set didn't come in quite like you thought. Verify with those who gave you those requirements that it's meeting that need and expectation. You might have to do slight modifications, but if you've done the legwork up front, it's going to set you up for success. And then you're going to be ready for that deployment. And so that takes on a whole host of things too, right? You don't just publish to the web, to your server. You have to train people. You have to let them know what's out there, et cetera. And then monitor usage. You're going to look for those who are using it actively, asking what makes them come to that report and why is it so valuable, so that you can make sure you repeat that in other concepts. And then for those who you would be expecting to use it and who are not, find out what that gap is. Is it a training issue? Did they not realize that it was available? Do they not have encouragement from the leadership that they should be doing that? So that's going to kind of level set how we're going to move through the panel discussion today. All right, so I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, give a little highlight to what they do. So I'm going to hand it over to Jen.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Weber from Academy School District 20, and I'm a senior programmer and data analyst in the district. I've been with the district almost 17 years now, and I absolutely love that part of my job is getting to work with data in Tableau. So let me turn it over to Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Thompson. I am a teacher on special assignment in curriculum and instruction. I've been in Academy School District 20 now for about 11 years. I work very closely with Jen. I'm kind of an intermediary between IT, or information technology, as well as our teachers and our school counselors who utilize this wonderful visualization that we've built. So I'm going to hand it over to Claire.
Hi again. I'll just add that my role in the graduation guidelines work is really around using Tableau to help visualize this data for stakeholders in the district. And I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Bryden.
Hi, Bryden Spencer. I'm an analyst in the Office of Enrollment here at BBSD. My connection to all this is I manage a lot of the state reporting. So I've been a part of the planning and logistics of getting the data we need to give to the state. And we've also talked about how we can leverage that data for reporting. And that's how Claire and I came to work on this together.
So I'm Christina Ethier. I'm the manager of performance analytics here at Cherry Creek Schools. This is, I guess in a week or so, it'll be about my 4th year here. And it's my 13th year in K-12 education. Yeah. Sarah Jennings. I'm a data analyst at Cherry Creek School District. I've been, I guess, in education since 2016 and at Cherry Creek for the past few years. I work with graduation guidelines on actually getting the data from assessment platforms, working with the IS team on loading it. And then I also work on the Tableau side and making sure everything's flowing in correctly and it looks good.
And just a logistical piece and something new that we're going to try out this morning. We have a Google Jamboard that we invite all of you to join and collaborate on. I'm going to put the link for that in our chat right now. So double check if that works, but when you open that up, you should have editing capability so that you can add comments, questions, any thoughts that you'd like to share with the group through the Jamboard. The way I have this set up, there are different pages that will correspond to the questions that we're talking about in the roundtable. So you'll see some of the questions that we are responding to, and we invite all of you to add a sticky note to any of those pages, either sharing your experiences with this step of the design process or any questions that are coming up for you. We will monitor this in addition to the Q&A within Zoom. Again, just wanted to try something new to collaborate with all of you and capture your great thinking. So thanks for trying that out with us this morning.
Sorry, I had a little issues unmuting consistently. Kept bouncing. All right, so let's get started today. So we are going to start with the concept of planning and ensuring that you have the right staff included to that process. So if we think about that reporting life cycle, it's all about planning up front to make it more efficient down the road. So what this panel, this roundtable is going to look like right now for this first series of questions is we're going to have each of the districts talk about how they are just in general. We're not going to kind of go through each of these questions. So if I can have, it looks like Boulder Valley, we're going to have you up first talking about the planning process.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So as we're going to share this morning, we are a little bit earlier in our data visualization piece of our graduation guidelines work. And we will share actually our case study and the work we've done so far on that a little bit later in more detail. But big picture, our grad guidelines work really started with focusing on getting the data pieces together in the right place in our student information system. So that's been the bulk of the work so far over the past couple of years. Through that, I think that's really set us up pretty well for the visualization step in that we've really been able to learn about the needs of our end users. They've seen and interacted with the data in the student information system, and now we have a better idea of how a visualization could help to serve them further with using that data. We have been and continue to be in the process of planning between colleagues in the IT department, write-in and enrollments, our student support services department, which includes our counselors, and myself representing the data visualization piece as well. I think that's been really great to have this collaboration between so many teams and those groups in particular, because each of those teams brings kind of a different role and perspective to the project and has different needs with this data. But I think there's a lot of benefits that we found by coordinating together. I think we're getting to better solutions that way with all of our thinking put together. And I'm hoping that that will help us be a little bit more efficient and meet various needs within the same effort of this project. The consumers of our data visualization initially is primarily focused on our school counselors. And so we have a great relationship with our one of our directors of student services, who is very keyed into the counselor needs and has worked with myself and Bryden on other projects before and can really speak to the data side as well. So she's a really valuable stakeholder to have in this work. through conversations with her, what we've kind of learned overall is that our counselors are feeling like they just have a lot of data to track. And so their big need around a visualization is having a way to help kind of simplify and streamline that process so that our counselors can really not feel so worried about the data and can focus on the student needs from there. I think a surprise that came out of this project is not really about one group, but just the range of groups who kind of have a stake in this data and in the project. And again, I think, working with a variety of different groups is helping us kind of ask better questions about how we can design good visualizations to do more with this data. And I would say a big lesson learned that I was reflecting on was to start early, because you will be iterating a lot with this work over time. Would you add anything?
Thanks for that, Claire. Let's hear from Cherry Creek School District.
Can you share? Okay, Stephanie, I was gonna share the screen. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so kind of the way that we started was part of the reason I mentioned that I've been in Creek for 4 years is almost the day I walked in the door, I had folks asking me for a high school intervention dashboard. And they were folks from, they were high school principals, counselors, high school interventionists, kind of some of our special education directors that supported high schools, lots of different people asking. And so what we did is we followed the sprint process, which Stephanie had actually suggested to us. I think it was probably one of the first TUG meetings when I started in my position. And what the process does is it allows you to go from ideation to development pretty quickly. So we had each of our high schools, we have 6 comprehensive high schools, and then 1 alternative high school and now 1 online high school. We had each of the high school principals nominate a participant to partake in the sprint process. And then we followed this process where we had guided questions. Do you want to go to the next slide, Sarah? There we go. So what parts of evidence are you looking for? How did your building use data to support students and interventions? What pieces of evidence are missing? Who are the end users? Who are the stakeholders? And then other obstacles. So through this process, I believe we gave participants about 3 minutes to respond to each question, get all of their thinking out. Going through each of the questions. And then at the end, we had participants collaboratively synthesize the Post-it notes or the thinking that happened. And that ultimately got us to what we initially called our high school interventions dashboard, but ultimately became our graduation guidelines dashboard. Let's see. And then lessons learned. I think for us, one of the big lessons was, or for me, one of the big lessons has been the work is never done. Claire alluded to this, but it is very much an iterative process. And you'll get to good spaces, but then either state statute or state guidance will change, or I think one of the big ones we had this year was we hadn't determined how to track external graduation menu options. So kids who completed one of those menu options outside of our district, how we were tracking that. And so Sarah took the lead on that, but just sort of knowing that planning for the unexpected, I think, is one of our biggest lessons learned.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. All right, Jen and Brian, let's hear what's happening at Academy District 20.
All right. So we really started this process back in the school year 16-17 in our district. And we really split up the responsibilities between 3 departments in our district: curriculum and instruction, the information technology department, as well as our central registry, who's responsible for reporting the student interchange report to CDE. So I'm in the curriculum and instruction department, and we work really closely with school staff who are responsible for tracking the progress towards graduation. So I work with school counselors very closely, principals, any type of administration, as well as academic support. Our IT department really researched the support methods for tracking graduation requirements in Infinite Campus. So that's the platform we use. And then they really were able to build that visualization based on the concerns that a lot of our users shared about Infinite Campus's lack of robust capability to track that data. And then our central registry department, who is responsible for the interchange report, worked with IT to make sure that that graduation tracking data in IC is compatible with the graduation guidelines extract that is built by Infinite Campus for state reporting. So as we really began to plan, we really started to think about who are the end users and how are they going to use this. And we really realized that we have multiple end users, and the way they use it is going to vary a little bit differently. So we really try to encompass all of that in our visualization. So for example, school counselors and registrars really need a simple and consistent way to find students with whether they are on track or off track for graduation. And then our school counselors really expressed the need to see all graduation data in one place for students. So, and then also, rather than just seeing yes, are they on track, or no, are they not on track, our schools really wanted to see what methods do they use to try to meet graduation requirements. So what type of assessments did they take and what score did they receive, as well as what cut scores were there for those assessments, such as ACT, Workies, SAT, and so forth. In regards to that, also counselors then, as we started to build this, really expressed the need to be able to track credit requirements as well in the same place. So we're tracking math and ELA proficiency. So we started to build that into our visualization as well. So now really counselors can hover over a student in the visualization and be able to see which course credit requirements the students have met or have not met yet. So our counselors find that really helpful. Our IT department really wanted this tracking to be done electronically instead of paper. So we've made that happen. And then again, as central registry had stated, they really wanted our method of tracking to be compatible with the guidelines extract that they have to get to the state. And then as we started to take further, special education really voiced a concern about wanting to be able to identify their students in the visualization to have an IEP, or our students who are co-alt students on extended evidence outcomes. So that was built into our visualization as well. And then our district leadership and school leadership really wanted to see a big picture view of, what are our graduation rates across schools, as well as how are our different demographic groups doing towards graduation requirements across all schools. So that was all built in. So there's a lot of questions that we gathered from our end users as we thought about building this visualization. Some things that really surprised Jen and I as we started to work on this project is, schools really were interested in comparing graduation rates across different schools in our districts. That was really nice to see, because then they started reaching out to other schools who had really high graduation rates and meeting the competencies for math and reading and writing competencies to see how are you helping your students meet graduation requirements. I think it also was eye-opening as to how many of our counselors were really still relying on paper tracking for credit requirements, a lot of different other things, and really to shift them that way electronically. The biggest lesson that I learned, and I kind of in between the schools in IT a little bit, I work, is that really trying to make this data collection for the visualization as automated as possible. So we try to automate everything that we do to collect this data, because really in the end, it helps lessen the load on schools. It helps lessen the load on IT. It helps lessen the load on myself and my curriculum instruction department, central registry, as well as this is going to make a sustainable process. In the case that certain people within our district leave, we still have this process in place.
Thanks, Brian. So I think what everyone can resonate with is there are a lot of people who want their eyes on this data, and the value of having those rich conversations early on and asking those probing questions is going to lead to more efficient report building down the road. If you were to kind of go just off of, I'm going to, make a basic report that has, X, Y, and Z on it, but you're not thinking about all of those end users who need that report, you're either going to make 10 different versions of it, because they're all going to request something different, or you're going to keep going back and changing every time you have a new conversation. So the value of these rich conversations up front, I think, is very valuable. And all three of you had mentioned that. So I'm going to remind you that we have that Jamboard. I don't see anything on there yet, but know that if, because we are in this webinar setting, we don't have the ability to turn on your mics for all of the attendees, but that would be a place for you to share information. If you have questions specific to any one of the panelists who just spoke or will speak here soon, the Q&A pop-up box is where you're going to want to put that. They all have access to see that. And so if you have something specific, you could put the district name in there and they'll be able to go in and answer that question. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and set the stage for the next piece here. All right, so now we're going to transition that phase to that middle of that line where it's all about design, development, and deployment. So I'm going to ask the first question here to Boulder Valley. Describe your process for design, and that's with the report design all the way into that process for field mapping. And what I mean by field mapping is you have maybe a spreadsheet or however you collect that information to say, on this report, I need these 10 elements in order to make my dashboard. And here's how I'm going to get them and where, and whether it's a calculation or I'm going to go to this SQL table and it's going to be this field name, right? So that's what I mean by field mapping, just to clarify. All right, Boulder Valley, let's hear from you.
Thank you. And I will just add, I'm really enjoying this conversation so far. This is great. If you see Bryden and I kind of chatting off screen a little bit, we're kind of saying like, oh, that's a great idea. We need to follow up with them to see how they're doing that. So I hope this is helpful for everybody else joining as well. So yeah, in terms of report design and field mapping, I think where we are now, we can benefit a lot from a lot of the work that has been done on our student information system side with Infinite Campus. So there's been a big effort to kind of work on the processes of getting the right data in the right place. In terms of some of those pieces we have, we can populate automatically some of the bigger assessments that we give. Some things need to be entered into our system, but we've now had, well, our counselors have had some experience now of working with that data within Infinite Campus and kind of knowing like what's straightforward, what might be trickier about it. And so I think that's really helped us in our conversations about how do we pull in the right data for a MART that we can use for different reporting needs. And so that's kind of conversations with Bryden, thinking about the state reporting side, and then also thinking about the data visualization side. And so what we really talked about there is a data mart that can be kind of efficient and help us meet some of these various needs. And again, back to the point of understanding the stakeholder needs in this, that's so important to help us kind of think about and find these efficiencies on the data modeling side. In terms of design strategies, this is kind of my favorite thing to think about and work on. Again, understanding those end user needs is really the part that we need to start with and that I always try to think about first. So going to our end users and just asking that question of what questions do you need to be able to answer with the report? I think sometimes it's easy to kind of jump ahead and say, you know, like I know my mind starts spinning and I'm like, oh, we could visualize it this way or do this kind of cool interactive thing. But over and over, it's really been helpful to hold myself back a little bit and step back and just ask that basic question of what question do you want to be able to answer with your data? And then I've just found we will have such a clearer picture and an easier road to go down to design from that starting point with that. So yeah, so really identifying, again, what are the pieces of information that you need? Again, I think we've kind of done some of the upfront work and benefited from a lot of the work from IT about just saying what data is out there and available But then from that, what do we really want to highlight or present in an especially easy way for end users? Other things I think about in terms of the design strategies, how do we make the data really visual and interactive? So that's a huge benefit of using Tableau. And, especially for our school building users, they are just so busy and slammed with work that we really have to think about how do we make the data intuitive and easy to use. We don't want to add another difficult task to their plate. So those design decisions can take us pretty far there. And again, I think I mentioned this before, but especially we're initially thinking about counselors for our first visualizations. How do we really efficiently display information for them so that they're not even getting hung up thinking about this is data, but thinking about what can I do next for my students? What's the what now, what next kind of question that I can think about for students, given that I now have this information in an intuitive and easy to find way. Yeah, so those are just a few of the considerations that are going into this project.
Thanks, Claire. Brian and Jen, what would you have to add to that concept of the report design and field mapping?
Sure. So we kind of struggled with the same thing as Boulder initially, in that when we're first designing a report, obviously the thing you want to focus on is the data source and how to gather all that data. And a lot of this data wasn't in Infinite Campus. And so the first thing we had to do was really build out those places in Infinite Campus to store this data. So things like ASVAB scores, AccuPlacer scores, industry certifications, that we had the data, but we weren't storing it in IC. So the approach we took in building the data source essentially is, in IC, we created two types of assessment records. We had one for the actual test, like AccuPlacer, the actual different scores. And then we had a set of assessments that are kind of more like placeholder assessments, where they're specific to graduation requirements. And in those assessments, we evaluate, did the score the student earned on AccuPlacer, was that high enough to meet the cut point? So an example might be, we have AccuPlacer Next Generation math score as an assessment, but we also have an assessment called Graduation Requirements AccuPlacer Math. And that one has a yes, no value as to whether the student's score was high enough to meet that cut point. And how we populate these graduation requirements assessments, like Brian said, we wanted to make this as automated as possible. The less our schools have to do, the better. So we designed several SQL stored procedures that run each night. And what they do is they pull in the data from the actual assessments like AccuPlacer, ASVAB, SAT. They also pull in data from things on the transcript like concurrent enrollment classes, capstone classes, things like that. And the stored procedure evaluates if the student's grade and or test score was high enough to meet the cut point. And if so, it pushes a yes value into the corresponding graduation requirements assessment for that student. If not, it pushes a no value. And you might think these stored procedures, gosh, that takes a lot of time to run at night. But to be honest, we have it down where it now takes about 4 minutes. So you really can do it pretty efficiently. What we then did is really utilize this data from those graduation requirements assessments. And that was kind of our foundation for building the data source in Tableau. And I can talk more about how we did all that in the next question.
You're perfectly fine. Go ahead and transition into your development and your feedback modification process.
Gotcha. So for us, the first version of our report, like Brian said, we've been doing this since 16, 17, so it's changed a lot over the years. Our first version was a bit more simplistic in that it only tracked if a student had met the ELA or math proficiency requirement for graduation. We did also have a dashboard that showed the percent of on-track or off-track students at each school. Now, our process for gathering feedback is generally once we in IT feel the report is ready to go, we send it over to Brian and his director of curriculum and instruction, and they take a look at it, ask for any needed changes they might see. Then once we all feel comfortable with it, Brian and his team actually demonstrate that report to several of our stakeholder groups. And we've utilized the monthly meetings we have for administrators, school counselors, school registrars to be able to do this. The funny thing is that feedback, and Brian kind of already alluded to this, but it can surprise you. When we were first demoing this, I thought the schools would really dislike the dashboard where it compared their school's data to the other school's data. And I was worried they might think we were picking on them or something. But turns out a bit of healthy competition was a good thing. And the great thing about it is those schools that were maybe struggling in a certain area could see the schools that were succeeding and knew who to reach out to for advice. Now, over the years, we've redesigned our report based on this feedback we get from our stakeholder groups. And now the latest version of our report actually contains additional data like, have they met the course credit requirements for graduation? And a counselor can honestly hover over the student and the course credit requirement, and it will tell them where they are deficient. Do they need another English credit, a US history credit? Same thing with the assessments. They can hover over and see what the student's score was and what the cut points were for that assessment. And in some cases, like AP tests, it'll even show which AP exam the student used to meet that cut point. Then the most recent request has been the ability to break down the report by different demographic attributes. And the whole goal of this really started with our special ed office, but has expanded to other special populations, where schools wanted to be able to see how this report could, how different user groups, these demographic attributes like special ed students, Title I students, 504 students, stuff like that, if they were struggling to meet graduation requirements. So the nice thing about the report now is the schools can filter it by all these different groups and see if one group is struggling or another group is doing better than others. So basically for us, feedback from our stakeholders has been essential in designing our report over the years.
Perfect, thanks, Jen. Boulder Valley, I know your team is kind of newer to the process, but have you thought about what that development and feedback modification and how it might be any different from what Academy is currently doing?
Yeah, so our initial step into this in the visualization reporting part, we did some work to have a visualization for counselors that they could use at the beginning of the school year. But because of that, we were really working on this over the summer, which in a school district, as you know, poses some challenges for actually getting your stakeholder groups together to be reacting to things before that initial launch. So for what we've done so far, again, I mean, we are early in this. We worked really closely with one of our colleagues, kind of representing counselors. So I mentioned a little bit before, this is someone, we've worked with on other visualization projects before. We have a good relationship with her, and I think together we've kind of built that understanding of some of the needs of the counselor group. So, thinking ahead to what we'll need for training, some of the design ideas that have worked well in the past or not worked so well that we want to not repeat. So that was just an interesting way that we had to think about this work, was a little bit of planning ahead and trying to really do our best to have a good first iteration going into the school year, knowing that we would then have a chance to gather more feedback and iterate on that project. I think we did have positive feedback about that initial steps that we took, and that I'll share actually that example a little bit later. I think our big next step is going to be thinking ahead that our report is going to become more complicated. So again, I said we kind of dipped our toe into the reporting. We focused on SAT data, but we are going to need to bring in the whole menu, of course, of options that students are doing. And so I think we just need to be really mindful about, we still want the report and the visual to be simple, but the data itself is going to be more complex. So honestly, I'm kind of just soaking in all the ideas about how do we engage and get feedback from our stakeholders, knowing that we'll have kind of this next step challenge coming up.
So I think that's a really great point as you think about the timing of these events, knowing what's happening currently in the school district and breaks or just peak seasons of other work. How do you fit feedback and design sessions and requirements gathering in so that those people feel like they have the time and the space to give you all of that great thinking, and that, you know, it's just not yet another thing on their plate. And so how to frame that to have successful conversations. So as you know, you're sitting out there brainstorming, you know, like everyone else has been talking about, also right time of it could be important, and what do you need to capture before everyone leaves for summer, so that you can continue that great work. All right, so Sarah and Christina, if you would like to talk about your process at Cherry Creek for the training and the communication of these great dashboards.
So for the initial phase is probably what we'll talk about right now when it came to training and communication. So we embedded training within some of our established infrastructure. It's kind of when Jen mentioned too, like those monthly meetings. So we utilized high school principals, AP meetings, high school counselors, high school coordinators, as well as special populations. So we actually would go to those meetings, demonstrate the dashboards, and also allow them to interact with it while we were demonstrating. And while we were there, we gathered more feedback, more suggestions, right? If anything wasn't up to par on the workbooks, as well as provided workbook guides that they could reference. So it explains what each dashboard is, the specific filters, what you can do within each visualization, and then also how to download as PDFs or download student lists that they can print themselves. And then specific to communication, we provide updates with the links of the workbook and workbook guides through our ADCO communication, which stands for
Administrators Council. So
Thank you.
All of our district administrators, our central district directors, for all of our principals and APs.
And so then they would disseminate also throughout. And then we would also communicate with counselors as well. And then we provide Tableau resources on our backyard, which is like our SharePoint, and kind of where everyone within the district can go and find all the documentation. So that's
Perfect.
what we did for the initial phase.
Thank you. All right, Claire, I think you wanted to chat about the Jamboard for a second.
Yeah, so I saw a question pop up on the Jamboard. And so this was about, for anyone can jump in and answer this, but how do you track either a question or a need that you've gathered during the upfront interviews through that design process? And I think we could also extend this also for feedback. I think that's important. How do you track either those upfront needs or feedback and needs that you find along the way?
So feel free to kind of add in your own sticky. Claire, can you clarify when they respond, they just add a sticky close to that sticky? Is that how the concept?
Oh, we could do that, or if anyone wants to jump in and say what they do. But yeah, we can go sticky crazy. There's lots of room.
All right, we'll keep the conversation. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I can just quickly kind of speak to what we do. So when we get feedback or commentary or requests for improvements, they come to our office. And we'll often go through a process where we discuss them and prioritize with, we have an existing structure where we meet cross-functionally with our IT team. So we'll discuss it with them because it often will involve either expanding a data mart, adding field, trying to think about what else, Sarah, or changing a nightly SSIS job or stored procedure. So there's some vetting that needs to happen and prioritization that needs to happen. So I'm thinking again back to that timeline that Stephanie had at the beginning.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next because I know we still have one more set of panel questions, and then we have use case demonstrations by Boulder Valley and Cherry Creek today. So the final phase of that reporting life cycle, now that you've involved people, you've built, you've tested it, you've circled back to make sure it met all the requirements, you've deployed it, but then how do you maintain it and keep it viable, making sure that it's still relevant, it's still meeting the needs. I don't know that I've ever had a dashboard that stayed the same since day one, which is good, which means people are pushing you to think further. The lens with looking at data slightly changes. They're getting to think about expanding it and using it in new ways. And so I think, just knowing that you're going to build a dashboard and it will change is just something that everyone has to come to grips with. So I'm going to start with Cherry Creek. What is your planning process for report modification, release notes if you make slight tweaks along the way, and any additional training? So thinking of staff turnover, maybe some roles changed. How do you bring those people back in who might have missed those first aspects to training?
Perfect. So for report modifications, like Christina said, it's kind of a vetting process, but we review the suggestions for modifications specific to the workbook and determine the utility and then also the equity. So is this additional suggestion supporting all students? And is it beneficial to the majority of the school district for that particular modification? And then if it is, we meet with IT. If it's a simple modification, we'll do it. If it takes a little longer, we let them know too. Release notes. So if we do make modifications, updates, so it's not just with Tableau workbooks, right? But if the graduation guidelines menu of options change, if statute changes, we communicate that through our ADCO communication in the emails that are sent out weekly. And then those are disseminated throughout. We also communicate with our high school coordinators and counselors separately. And then for additional training, we try at the beginning of the year to use those monthly meetings with counselors, coordinators, principals, and actually get in there, remind them that this workbook is there, the benefit of it, and let them dig through it and show them how to use it. So it's really those beginning of the year, kind of what Stephanie mentioned about turnover. It's just, this is here, this is a resource. Let us know if you have questions. And then throughout the year, it's kind of ad hoc trainings as requested. So.
Perfect.
And
Thanks.
just one clarification I'll add is I realize both Sarah and I keep saying high school coordinators. What we specifically mean is department coordinators. Yeah. So like our English coordinators or math coordinators, because they are all pretty involved in this process at each of the high schools. So, sorry.
No.
Perfect. All right. So Jen and Brian, if you can talk to us about how you maintain it, the dashboards, monitor usage, find out who's your rock stars and who needs a little push to get using it, and then how are you capturing all of that feedback?
So in general, for maintaining the dashboard, the IT office is responsible for doing that and making sure the data source is kept up to date. We have notifications set up on all our jobs, stored procedures on SQL Server Management Studio. So if a nightly process fails to run, we get notified right away and we can act on it. We also have similar notifications set up on Tableau server for the extract of the report. So if for some reason that didn't run, or it stops for some reason, we know about it so we can fix it, ideally before the schools even catch on that there's a problem. But also, Brian's team is great at reviewing this visualization regularly and notifying us if they notice any problems with it. We also like to utilize the "Who has seen this view" feature in Tableau so that we can see which dashboards of the viz are most popular. If there's one that's not being used that much, you know, we can ask the schools then if there's something they would like added to it that would be more helpful. And in that same feature, "Who has seen this view," you can kind of see which users are using the report heavily versus those that might need some more encouragement to do so.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm aware of, I'm just kind of tracking time. I'm going to ask each district to have a speaking representative pick one of the biggest lessons learned, not a series, just one. So I'll give you a second to think. Okay, there you go. Claire or Bryden, what is your biggest lesson learned through this process?
I think, I know, just picking one. I think really the work with the end users and making sure that's a partnership. I mean, that's true for any project, but complicated data projects like this, especially.
Okay, sorry to narrow that down. All right, Jen and Brian, who wants to pick the single biggest lessons learned?
Yeah, I think Stephanie, like you had spoken about before, a project of this size is never ending. It's constantly evolving and constantly needs to be reviewed and updated and so forth. So that's really what we've noticed.
Okay, and Sarah and Christina.
So ours is similar. This process is a little bit like parenting. You're never quite done. It's very much iterative. To be flexible and to be humble and listen to feedback and take it in and really take it in stride.
Perfect. I love all of those answers. That's why I love what I do, because I get to talk to people and get them to think through all of these great things that you all just talked about. So definitely resonates. And so for those who I just kind of, you had a long list that prepared that you wanted to talk about, remember we have that the Jamboard that you could kind of post those additional thoughts and as well to the rest of the audience. So we're going to keep moving, and we're going to transition to our case studies. So we know there's a lot of great work happening around this concept, not only for the peers within Colorado, but our friends who are joining outside of the state. But we're going to have two different case studies that are going to kind of play off of what has been talked about already, but right, everyone in Tableau loves to see some visuals. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth. We're going to start with Boulder Valley, Claire and Bryden talking about theirs. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to them.
Thanks. I'll get my slides up here. Okay. So again, we are dipping our toe into the visualization of this data through this roundtable. We're kind of like, oh, are we behind on this? In terms of the Tableau piece of it, but I will share kind of where we are right now, and we're really excited to be moving forward with this work now. So, all right, I already did our introductions earlier. So our graduation guidelines project really started thinking through the data process part. And as I said, that work actually has started a lot earlier and has been going on now. So this was really focused on within our Infinite Campus, capturing those performance measures for each student at the beginning the year that they would like to use, so both in ELA and math. In IC, there's an automated check against the data that we already have. So things like a lot of the assessment data, the capstone classes that are really already in our system. And then there's ways to add additional requirements manually to the student's transcripts. So through that, we really do have this whole process of documenting and tracking in Infinite Campus. And this has been worked out already for students, counselors, and families. The part that we're at now that I keep saying we're new to this part of it is really developing more of the reporting piece and especially the visualization piece, but also thinking about the state reporting aspect too. And I mentioned that as we think about both the state reporting and data visualization, we're really trying to partner and think about where do we find efficiencies there with that data. So for the particular project that we started with, as I've alluded to, our audience primarily to start with has been counselors, and the need that we learned about at the beginning of this project was really needing to address that overwhelm that our school counselors are feeling in tracking the multiple ways that a student can meet the graduation requirements. So the first step that we decided to move forward with visualizing is focused on SAT data, because that is still a really key piece of data that a lot of our students are using. So I'll just share a couple of screenshots of this. This is what I ended up building for our counselors to do their SAT specific grad guidelines check. So what we've got going on here at the top of the view, I wanted to clearly include the information of what those benchmark threshold values are for meeting in both the EBRW and math areas of the SAT. And then in Tableau, I created a calculation that looks at whether students are have met both of those content areas, if they've only met on the ELA side, if they've only met on the math side, or if they didn't meet either. And so here I combined a couple of visual ideas. So having a little symbol to help visualize the progress there and where those students are at. And then also just using a number that kind of pops out and lets you see the big picture of how many students are in each of those categories. I will also point out, so there's filters on this view for school and counselor. Not many of our Tableau views have that counselor filter, but in this case, that was very important to include. And that was also some of the upfront work that we did with the data, was to make sure that we're tying the right counselor to the right student and pulling that data from the right place. From there, at the bottom of the view, there's a list of students. Again, that'll show their information about school. These are all 12th graders, counselor, information about the students, and then again, that category of meeting, not meeting, or partially meeting. Another thing I thought about with this design was that it is pretty consistent with how a lot of our other dashboards look. So, you know, from the branding at the top, having the touchstone shapes in the upper right corner that our users can hover over to get more information. Those are all things that they're already familiar with in other reports. So just making sure to keep that consistent. And then having more of the summary big picture data at the top and being able to drill down to students below that. I already mentioned the calculated field. So that was really the key piece of development within this workbook with the data. Keeping the visuals very simple and easy to filter. I don't think I mentioned that. So the shapes up at the top are also filters. So a user can just click on any of those and that will filter down the list to say only those 10 students who didn't meet in either area. So you can very quickly get down to the student level and see who those students are. I did mention including the counselor information. So the last thing I wanted to point out as well is the Viz and tooltips. So for each student in the list, if you hover over their row, I did include a little visualization in the tooltip to pop up. And again, another way to kind of drill down on this information. So again, details about the student at the top, what category they're in, but a little bit more information. So you can actually see from their SAT results, how close were they? If they were not meeting in one area, how close did they get to that? If they've already met, where did they fall? So just adding a little bit more context to drill down to. So where we're at now, thinking about next steps and really building on this visualization concept. So we did get positive feedback about the ease of use of this dashboard for our counselors. And I think our next step is kind of going with this same theme of having pretty simple visuals to help check just overall which students have met or not met in their selected requirements. And then drilling down to see a lot more of the details. So we still need to, obviously work out the whole process and see if that concept is going to work. But I think we have a pretty strong foundation at this point to start building and getting feedback and iterating onto our next steps.
Perfect.
Right.
Thanks for sharing, Claire. And if you have any questions for Claire Bryden, if you want to go ahead and put those in, I know that she has to step away here in a few. So if there's anything that you need her Boulder Valley to specifically respond to, if you can post those questions sooner than later. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah and Christina now, so we can hear about how Cherry Creek is doing their dashboards.
Perfect. So just to kind of, let's see if it works, where we all started. So Christina mentioned starting from the sprint process that built a high school intervention dashboard. And now we'll kind of see where we are. So we always get asked, where's my data? Why isn't it there right now? So we have data from all over, right? We have CE courses from community colleges, IB, Work Keys, AccuPlacer. So we have scheduled times in which we pull those from the actual assessment sites. And then we load those into the database, and they're nightly runs that run nightly on Tableau. Kind of when Jen mentioned, like, we can see if things fail, whether it's on the stored procedure side or extracts within Tableau. And then PowerSchool is a little more tricky. So data gets loaded monthly, but then from PowerSchool to the data warehouse, it gets loaded nightly. So we pretty much tell people to go straight to Tableau for the data of truth, since it's updated nightly. So kind of where we are now on like data management and stuff. So as we've said before, who views the data? So we have high school principals, counselors, content coordinators, as well as registrars have access. It's a constant with maintaining and editing the data warehouse and Tableau. So we have, like Christina mentioned, cross-functional meetings every couple of weeks with our IS team. And so we have an assessment calendar, which I took a screenshot here, but it pretty much gives a full picture from the beginning to the end of the year of the exact assessments that all students are taking, when we pull the data, and then when data needs to be loaded into the warehouse, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We update reference tables and cut scores, which we also provided a screenshot here. So if cut scores or if tests get added, we update that assessment reference table, which then feeds our graduation reporting tables. And then from the data analyst side, we create and manage SSIS packages that when we gather the original data from different platforms, we run the package and it spits out pretty data that we can send to the IS team. And then Tableau, so every time we load new data, we validate it, and then kind of that continual vetting of suggestions and changes to the workbook. I'll go over lessons learned now before I actually dive into the workbook. So like Christina said, the work never changes or never ends. So statute and guidance changes from CDE. She mentioned previously, we realized that we weren't capturing external data. So students who came out of district, we didn't have an established process for that. So that was something new this year that we needed to implement. And then there's constant revisions to internal processes with documentation and communication with IS. Be willing to be open for, or openness for the unexpected. So things are always going to be changing, and don't take it personally, and just be willing to go with the flow. Be as organized as possible with documentation, requirements, everything. One thing I think I've learned this year was having empathy for school staff as they implement this for the first time. Everyone's really on edge, knowing that this is required this year, and really having the open dialogue between us and the staff, so they understand where we're coming from and why data may not be there immediately. And then also understanding their perspective, that like they're putting these students first, and it really is impacting their lives when it comes to graduation. Okay, so now we will dive in. So this is all dummy data, but this is exactly what our workbook looks like. Let's do full screen. So we have 3 dashboards, and most of our dashboards go large to small. So what's the district as a whole? And then as we get down the dashboards, it gets to specific students. So we have all the filters at the top: school year, grade, include on track to graduate or on track credits, include actual metrics, include preliminary. So this includes like PSAT, pre-ACT, those assessments that are correlated with, if you pass PSAT, you're more than likely going to pass SAT.
Yep.
School, okay, so we have show only active students and all students ever enrolled. Majority of the time it'll always be active. Show students by homeschool, or show students at adaptive programs. So even if a kid is at transitions or ranch, like their main school is still responsible for them. And then we have all students specifically enrolled at our innovation campus, and students not enrolled at our innovation campus. So at the top, we have overall district, and then we have by specific schools, what their percentage of meeting graduation guidelines are. We have the on-track credits on the left, and if you hover over, you can see what the criteria is specifically for each grade, as well as the percent that's on and off track. And then we have the graduation guidelines. So those who have met both, there's, depending on the data, but there's met only English and math, or not met either. And then it gives you a total count. And then these are the actual metrics and counts. And then if you hover over, you can see the benchmark scores and specifically what test options for each are available. And then usually if we do have preliminary evidence, it looks very similar to this table and would be below. So the next one gets at more different student demographics and groups. So you have the same KPIs up top, same filters, and then you're able to see with student breakouts, the percentage of students who are meeting both, are on track with credits, met both, met only English, met only math, or none at all. And you can multi-select. So you can pick non-sped, Asian. And we have tooltips throughout. And I think our favorite, or my favorite dashboard is the student. Yeah, this is the page that everyone goes to. So this gets at specific students. So you could pick a school, their grade. You can select, I want to see the students who have not met graduations. You can also filter by demographics to make the student list even smaller, but you're able to get the full list of students, whether or not they are meeting with their credits or not, whether they've actually like met actual math and English requirements. So with the X or the check mark. And then another feature we have is if you click a student or their name, another visual pops up. And so you can see exactly what they've met with credits and if they're on track. And then whether or not they've met math or English, and then all the tests they've taken. So this kid has taken ACT, but hasn't met it yet, as well as taking SAT and has not met it yet. So you're able to see, we can check this one. This one's better. So, yeah. And then we also have a resource page that provides the credits needed, and then all of the menu of options and the benchmarks for every single assessment.
Menu option.
Yeah, menu of options. And then I also wanted to show y'all, we also have a workbook guide. Like I was mentioning earlier, so it tells them which dashboards are available, and then it dives into what the filters are. Tips, so if you hover or click a specific thing, it filters, and it goes by each dashboard. And then at the very end, it shows how you can download as a PDF or specific student list. So here we go.
Perfect. Thank you for your willingness to share all of the great work that's being done, not only with the creation of it, but all of the supplemental materials that you're producing for all of those consumers. What I think, let me share my screen again. Back on track. All right, so we have a couple of upcoming events that are education related. I also co-facilitate the National K-12 Tug. It was originally scheduled for April 20th. There is a Salesforce education conference that I think is going to overlap, so we might have to adjust that date. We will come back again May 4th. So this is my plug for presenters for our next presentation in May. And then in June, we're looking at doing or trying to coordinate some different workshops across the country, all focused on education. So those are some things in the pipeline. I'm also going to do a plug here, and let me grab the link, put it in the chat to everyone. So here in just under 2 weeks, I will be co-facilitating a webinar on the Analytics Center of Excellence. Very much aligns to the Tableau blueprint. Very much of it is about strategy, and we've talked a lot about that concept today. It's more than just Tableau, though. It's thinking about pulling together a team to really support data analytics as a whole, talking about making those connections with the different users, forming governance teams, talking about infrastructures and architectures, security. So we have a concept that we call ACE that is very much along the line of the Tableau blueprint, if you're familiar with that. So feel free to register if you'd like to kind of learn more about that process. The link is now in the chat. And then we have some general links that we'll post out there regarding the K-12 Tug. There's user groups out there. There's the community forums. There's a K-12 user group on LinkedIn, and then some specific education resources. So I'll make sure that at the close of this, I will, and once we get the video posted on YouTube by the Tableau team, we will share these links. I'll ask our panelists if they have any collateral that they would like to share. I will also include that out there. And again, it is a plug for May for additional presenters. I think what we would like to have, I know specifically in the fall, we already have talking with one of the districts about the monitoring at-risk students. I think Millard Public Schools out of Omaha, Nebraska might have been volunteered already for that one. So that's kind of what we're thinking going forward, is to pick a concept and to kind of wrangle up some presenters ahead of time to give you all time to think about it. So Claire and I don't have a specific topic picked for May. So if you have something that you would love to share with the team, we'd be happy to frame that. We also have Tableau conference, which is unique. I don't have a slide in that one. They don't have a ton of information out there yet, but it will be in May towards I think towards the end of the month. It's partial in person and virtual still. And so if I get additional information, I'll be happy to share that as well. And if there's any K-12 meetup groups, I will try to share that. They used to try to do at least one meeting around that one. So we are done early. We are early. So I think we'll just call it. Well, that's, take a breather. Oh, I heard. So Darren from Omaha, May 17th through the 19th. Yes, thank you. In Vegas. Man, wish I could go. I love Vegas. I will go ahead and wrap this meeting up a few minutes early. So take a breather, grab a cup of coffee, or actually we're transitioning to lunch now. And I will send out this recording in case you want to follow up. If you need to have me help connect you with other team members, that's what I'm here for. So reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the right people. Or if you'd like to chat data and visualizations, I am always happy to talk about that. So, all right, take care, everyone, and we will talk to you all in May. Thanks.